Let's do this. Good morning, podcasters. Today is Tuesday, June 23rd, 2026, and today, podcasting has never been bigger, yet creators still struggle to get discovered, grow an audience, and make money. Rob Walch joins us to discuss what's changed and where indie podcasters should focus next. So if you're listening live on Clubhouse, hit the share button, top right-hand side of the screen, and share it however Clubhouse lets you. And if you're catching us via podcast, YouTube, etc., please share this episode with a fellow podcaster. And now give us about 30 seconds, and we'll get things rolling. Thanks for being here. The Podcasting Morning Show is powered by Ironic Media, helping podcasters launch, polish, and grow great shows. And by Content Creators Accountant, helping creators build real business behind their content. Good morning again, Podcasting Morning Show. Thank you so much for being here, and I am so glad to be back in the home studio. It's been 3 weeks since I've actually been here sitting at my familiar desk, so it's great to be back. I know I was doing shows last week, but that was from all different places, Maryland, Atlantic City, etc. So it's great to be here, and let me introduce my co-hosts currently here with me. We have Ralph Estep, DR Fay, and we also have our guest here, Rob Walch. And also, by the way, Dan Schultz has joined us on stage as well. And good morning to Tim, Dave, and Jessica, who's already joined us here in the audience on Clubhouse. So, yeah, we are going to talk with Hall of Famer Rob Walch here in a second, but let's do this formally, properly. Ralph, I'm going to hand the baton to you. Please introduce our guest today.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's my pleasure to do that. Our guest today has been in podcasting almost as long as podcasting has existed. Rob Walch started back in 2004 before most people even knew what a podcast was, and he founded a show called Podcast 411. It's one of the very first shows about people actually making podcasts. Rob went on to spend 18 years at Libsyn as VP of Podcaster Relations. He's a member of the Podcasting Hall of Fame, and he co-wrote a book, Tricks of the Podcasting Masters, which Amazon named a top 10 reference book. Today, he's VP of Podcaster Relations at Captivate, working alongside Dax USA on the exact questions every creator is wrestling with right now. Questions like growth, money, AI, and yes, video. There aren't many people who can connect where podcasting started to where it's headed. Rob is one of them. Rob, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show today.
By the way, Rob, you may be muted. You might be on mute. I think he is. Sorry.
All right. Thank you very much for having me on.
Great to have you here, Rob. And let's dig into the first point that Ralph shared. You've been in podcasts in this world longer than almost anybody, and probably a year or two longer than I have. I always am proud to say I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I think you've surpassed me. Take us back to 2004. What was your impression of podcasting back then, and what made you jump into it in the first place?
My impression back then, when it first started out, it reminded me of the BBS era of the early 1980s. So that was, it was really...
Were you a part of that?
Yeah,
and by the way, that's bulletin board system for those who don't know.
Yes, I was on Long Island, and I was lucky enough to have a local number to Pirates Cove, which was one of the big BBSs.
I was a CompuServe guy.
Okay. Yes, and we used to pass around those CompuServe passwords to get on there for free. That was what BBSs were good for. No, so podcasting to me was very community oriented in the very early days, because it had to be, because it wasn't where you ask somebody like today you ask people what podcast they listen to. Back then you go, have you ever heard of this thing called podcasting? And then you had to explain to them how to get this third-party app, iPod or Lemon or iPod or X, and how to use that to subscribe to an RSS feed to transfer to your iPod. That literally was how it worked back in the days. So it
Hmm.
was a very different medium. Apple wasn't in there supporting it yet. So much more niche, much more community at that point because it had to be.
Yeah, I remember that well, and it's so cool. I was just talking about bulletin board systems with somebody because we were long story, but I was just talking about how I've been on the internet longer than most people, right? Because those CompuServes and other platforms, that was the way that we all communicated. I created a fanzine, like a magazine for not for podcasting. I wish this one was for comic books, and I used to find guests, in other words, interviews for that platform. And I would find like literally comic book authors. I interviewed people like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles creator and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that was like really the early days. That was before podcasting, and a lot of us ended up transitioning there decades later. So that's really cool. Ralph, you had a question.
Yeah, Rob, you founded Podcast 411 before people even knew what a podcast was. I mean, you had to do a lot of work, I guess. Did it feel like the start of an industry, or did it feel like some strange experiment only a small group of people understood?
It felt like well, initially it was a small group of people that only understood it, like only it was really two groups. I mean, it was two groups of people podcasting back in 2004. Techie geeks, which is where I fell in, and musicians, because we were the only ones that had the equipment or the know-how to get it to work. So you had people, like Dave Jackson, who was on the musician side. You had myself, that was more on the geeky side, Mur Lafferty on the geeky side, Rob Greenlee on the geeky side. So that was what it was. It was a nice mix of folks, some really strange folks. You had Yeast Radio with Madge Weinstein. So those were some real interesting characters in those early days. But I started Podcast 411 because I wanted to start podcasting in October of 2004. And I looked around, there was not a single tutorial other than this one article in Engadget that said, hey, if you want a podcast, just put this enclosure tag in your RSS feed and you're good to go. And I'm like, what did that just say? And so I was engineer, I figured it out. And I said, well, if it took me this long to figure it out, I'm going to help people. And I wrote a nice tutorial about how to do all that, manually code your feed. And then there's some services started coming along to help podcasters. And then eventually by middle of 2005, Apple jumped in and put podcasting into iTunes. And that really opened the door. That was really where the first inflection point of podcasting really started.
I have to pause here and go off script, quote unquote, and I have to point something out. Rob, is that a Blue Yeti?
Oh, this is a
Yeah.
Yeti Pro.
Okay, a Yeti Pro.
Yeti
Okay.
Pro. Yes.
Okay, so not the Blue Yeti.
No.
Specifically. Okay, cool. All right, because I was going to ask, because a lot of people poo-poo the Yeti and especially the Blue Yeti, and
That's because they don't know how to use it.
Exactly. That's what I was.
You need a quiet room. That's all. You just need a quiet room with the Yeti, and it's a good mic, and I like the sound of my voice off of it. And on top of that, I work with a lot of people that are starting out, and this is a mic that a lot of people will use starting out. So it gives me a chance to tell them, here's what you need to do. You got to set this little gain here over near the G. Don't overturn it up. But yes, and I use the Pro because it has both USB and XLR. So I can switch depending on how I'm doing it. Sometimes I'm running it directly into my Zoom recorder. Sometimes I'm running it, like today, USB into my MacBook.
Got it. Okay, cool. So there you go, people. It's just a matter of knowing how to use some of the equipment before we go and poo-poo them. Let's get into some other areas here. What's one thing early podcasters understood better than some creators understand today?
I'll go back to the quiet room. Because early on there was a lot of musicians and they understood acoustics and they knew how to have their room and everything situated. This is not the most ideal acoustics in this room, but compared to my last studio, but having a nice quiet place is really important. The other thing was community. I think the early podcasters knew that it was really about getting out and finding other podcasters to become friends with, to cross promote with. You had to cross promote back then. You had no choice. You had to. A lot of podcasters today will get in and do their niche and they never talk to another podcaster. And I'll ask podcasters, like who else, what other shows are you talking with, or where are you cross promoting? Like, oh, I don't know anybody else in podcasting, and that I think is really sad. I think that's probably the biggest change in the podcasting community, is that there's a lot of people, today, that just come in, they get an account set up somewhere, and they never talk to another podcaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, Rob, you were named one of the most influential people in podcasting very early on. And you co-authored a book I mentioned a little while ago, Tricks of the Podcasting Masters, back in 2006. Rob, when you look back at the advice people needed then, what's funny to you now? What's outdated, or what's surprisingly still true back to that original date, 2006?
I think we mentioned using MySpace, so that would probably be pretty funny. That's for a promotion point of view. I mean, some of the services that we talked about have long since died. I don't think we talked too much about Facebook or even at all, because we were writing that book. We started writing it at the end of 2005. There's some things in there. Just we don't mention YouTube at all in that book, I don't think. So that's definitely changed. Back in the day, back in 2005, podcasting was a mix of audio and video. When you looked at the big shows, there was just as many big shows that were video as there were audio. It's funny how it's come back around to that now.
Yeah, and that's what I'm excited about with this conversation, because you've seen podcasting go from this small experimental thing into a massive media category now. So let's talk about what's actually changed, right? A lot of independent podcasters listening right now wonder if they're too late to get into this game now. Based on everything you've seen, is podcasting harder to break into now, or are the opportunities just different?
Well, to break into, it's harder, but there's still not that many people podcasting. When you look at the reality, how many active podcasts there are that have released a new episode in the last 90 days, that number really hasn't changed when you throw the AI slop out. That hasn't changed for humans in the last 5+ years. It's right around 400,000, 450,000 of podcasts have released a new episode in the last 90 days. And that number's been really relatively flat. And that means the number of people pod fading is equal to the number of people podcasting. But that number is so much smaller than the number of bloggers or the number of people that are just doing YouTube video. So podcasters, people putting content on an RSS feed, for my definition of a podcast, you have an RSS feed and your podcast is an Apple Podcasts. And it's a human creating the content, which I know that last one drove some people nuts on LinkedIn when I added that to my definition. The other people hate when I say, well, it also has to be an Apple Podcast. Like, why does it have to be an Apple Podcast? I go, because there's 400 plus apps in the world that aggregate podcasts that pull from Apple's directory. So if you're not in Apple Podcast, you're not in about 400 different apps out there.
I appreciate you saying it that way, right? Because a lot of people just kind of stand on that hill and say, if it's not on Apple or if it's not this or that, then it's not a podcast. But I appreciate you putting it in that way, because if you're not on Apple, then you're probably not getting distributed to all of these different platforms. So thank you for saying that.
And a lot of times people will say to you, well, what's your Apple Podcast URL? I want to look at your podcast. And if you don't have an Apple Podcast URL to talk about, they're like, are you okay? So you're not really a podcaster. You're just someone who's got a video show on YouTube, or you're just someone that has a webcast or a netcast that just basically putting audio up on their website, and they're not really distributing it. They just want you to come to their website. And that's podcasting. I think the core part about podcasting was universal distribution everywhere. That was the whole idea of it, was to be out everywhere. And by putting yourself into Apple Podcasts, you are putting yourself to most places. You still have to submit to Spotify and Ghana and JioSaavn and a few others, Deezer, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. There's a small group that you still need to submit to, but the reality is, after you submit to those 10 places, you're everywhere. And one of those 10, by the way, puts you out 400 other places. And which one is that? Apple. So.
Yep. All right. Now, I know, DR, you have a question. I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to remind everyone that if you are on stage and want to ask a question, you are more than welcome. And if you are listening live, go ahead and put your question in the chat, or of course, if you're on Clubhouse, come up on stage and ask it here in person. Love to have you here. So with that, DR, what was your question?
Okay, so when it comes to podcasting, Rob, you are probably one of the most knowledgeable people on this earth. What is it that has surprised you with all your knowledge about podcasting? What is it in the past 20 years since you've written the book that has really thrown you for a loop? Maybe it's something that you made a prediction about and it didn't come true.
And I think the one thing that surprised me most is some really good podcasts that I just thought these are going to take off. They're going to be huge hits. Some even with A-list celebrities that just never picked up an audience. So I think overall, what surprised me the most about in podcasting is the shows that have connected and the shows that haven't. I mean, the ones that haven't, probably surprised me more than anything else. The late Louis Anderson I thought he had a great podcast, and it just never took off. And I really loved his show. And there's been others. I don't want to name names because they're still alive. Well, I'll name another one. Norm Macdonald's podcast. I loved Norm's podcast, and Norm Macdonald. It never really hit the numbers I thought it had the potential to be. I mean, Norm was one of the funniest people I've ever talked with, ever met, and his show was hilarious. And I guess maybe that just might be my personal bias. I liked his sense of humor. But there were just a few others that are still alive. I won't name names that I thought had really great shows that just never connected. And I don't know what it was. You just never know what it is. And then there's others that I've seen the numbers to, and I go, man, this must be BS. There's no way this show is doing that well. And I have to go and look and dig in the numbers and go, well, it really is okay. Or those numbers are legit. The person really does have that size audience. And so, yeah.
How do you, when you say you dig into the numbers, how do you do that? Because from the public side of things, you don't get to see it the way you get to see YouTube's numbers, for example.
Yeah, well, I've had the advantage that I've been working at hosting companies for the last 20 years. 19 years, and I've been able to literally go in and see what the numbers are and really dig. And there's other things you can do when shows aren't you don't have access to the numbers that you can do and do some sanity checks, like in Apple Podcasts and elsewhere. You can see if a show is quote unquote in the top 10, it's constantly in the top 10 of Apple Podcasts category, but never is in the top 200 for an episode in that category. Right? You're going, all right. So there's some people that have drove their numbers up on shows by hiring services out of Malaysia and other places to subscribe, right? The way Apple does the top 200 show lists is based on number of new subscribers in the last 24 hours, 24, 48, 72 hours, weighted average, and then the last week overall. And that's different than how they do the episode, which is based on consumption. So you can look and see if a show is in that top 20 constantly, but never shows in the top 200 for an episode. You know it doesn't have real consumption. You know the numbers are BS. But then also getting into seeing the raw numbers and server logs and being able to look in and where those downloads are coming from. Are they coming from the U.S.? Are they all coming? Are they coming from the U.S., but all the downloads are from Georgia for some reason, right? Something's not right. And so there's easy ways to tell when numbers are fraudulent or bogus.
And Rob, that really leads us right into the growth question. You've kind of been dancing around that. And a lot of creators aren't just wondering if podcasting still works. They're wondering why their show isn't growing faster. Do you have some ideas of what the folks who are tuned in this morning and saying, oh yeah, Rob's a great guy. He's been around forever. He's got to know some hacks for me to be able to see growth. Do you have any of those, Rob?
Okay, so first, there's no silver bullet, but there are some things you can do to increase your probability of growing your show. Releasing on a consistent basis, right? Release on Tuesday morning, release on Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, wherever it is. Be consistent so people know when to expect your new content. Not everybody has the luxury of being a Dan Carlin where you can release once every, 9 months, 12 months, and still get 3 million downloads. But for the rest of us folks, we need to release on a consistent basis, and then be consistent in the formatting, consistent in what the content you're doing, because people have certain expectations of your show. And then most importantly, interact with your audience. It is so important to have a call-in number. When people have looked at, and Apple looked at this, and I've looked at this, and some others have looked at this, when we looked at shows that launched, and they launched with 10 episodes, 5 episodes, 3, 2, 1, what was found, what I found was 1 in 3 shows that launched with 1 in 3 episodes did better than those that launched with 5, and 10 did the worst. Apple looked at it, they found that was 2 was the ideal number of episodes. And the reason is, when you launch with 10, you're giving an expectation to your audience that they're not going to be part of your show. But when you launch with 1 or 2, you're saying right from the beginning, hey, here's my call-in number, here's my email address, send us some questions, be part of the show, be part of this community. And the shows that can grow a community can grow a show. If you've never, as a podcaster, interacted with anybody in your audience isn't growing. I can tell you that right now.
That's fascinating, and I never had heard that before, and that's really interesting. Usually, I recommend 3, but that makes a lot of sense now. So I think I'm going to start pushing 2 to my clients. So when a podcaster comes to you, Rob, and says, "I want to grow," what do you wish that they understood first?
Well, yeah. First off, there's no service out there that you can hire that will be a light switch that will turn on, your numbers will jump up. I mean, legitimately jump up. There are services you can hire, your downloads will jump up, but your audience won't. Because when you turn that service off, it drops. As a matter of fact, a lot of the people that are using those services, if you actually go and look at your stats, you'll see all of a sudden, every so often, you'll have a day or two where the numbers drop to nothing. Well, that nothing is your audience, because that service had a problem or an issue or whatever it was. So it's really easy to tell some of these folks that have hired these services that are, quote, the people come out of Bangladesh or whatever, Fiverr, they get you on LinkedIn. And especially when you launch a new podcast, they find your email address and they send you an email saying, hey, I can help you grow your show, and it's organic growth and instant growth and yada, yada, yada. And it's all BS. And people will spend $250, $300, $500 or more. I mean, the saddest story I heard was I called up this couple, and sad for the guy. And I called up this couple. I said, hey, I'm looking at your numbers, and these aren't legit. And did you hire a marketing service? And you mind me asking how much you paid? And the husband goes, yeah. He goes, I hired a service and I paid $7,000.
Whoa.
And the wife said the one thing husbands never want to hear. The wife says, is that service I told you not to use? And I was like, oh, can I just exit stage left here? Because he's still hearing about that today.
Oh, I'm sure.
In every argument, it doesn't matter. She could run the cat over with the car, and she's going to just turn to him and go, remember that one?
It sounds like you might have been through something like that at some point in your
I've had
life.
I've had that phrase used on me before.
DR, go ahead.
So there is SEO. We all have heard about SEO. And then there's SEO for podcasting. Is there indeed a difference? And if there is, can you explain it? And also, when it comes to, is there such a thing as keyword stuffing when it comes to the description, the podcast description, or the episode description? I heard that it doesn't exist yet, but wait 5 minutes, we'll see.
So
go ahead.
To answer your question, I used to call it ISO, like iTunes search optimization. Now Apple podcast search optimization. So you have to understand so I'm going to talk about Apple and Spotify here, because those are the two big ones. And when we talk Apple podcast, how search works is really simple. What's in the title of your show and the author tag, and then the title of your episode and the author tag of the episode. Those are the only fields that Apple looks at. So what's in the title matters. What the title of your podcast is so important. People get really cute on titles. So if you want to do a podcast about video games, and you call it the Cheese Doodle Podcast because you're always eating cheese doodles when you're playing video games. That's cute, but it's not what people are searching for. What you want to do when you launch a podcast is you want to think about 4 or 5 different words, keywords that you would search for. Matter of fact, you should go and do this. You should go and search for these words in Apple Podcasts. See if there's podcasts on that. But then take those 4 or 5 words or terms and then go into Google Trends and see what people actually are searching for in the world. And then pick your title that way. So I just launched a podcast earlier this year. It's called Space Business 411. And I wanted to talk about the space economy, space business. I was going to call it Space Economy 411 until I went into Google Trends and found out that space economy is searched for about 1/10 the amount of times as space business. So the podcast title became Space Business 411. If 2 years from now, space economy is 10 times or bigger, 5 times bigger than space business, my podcast title will change. That's the other thing I think people get married to the title of their show when it's changed. I started out with a show called Today an iPhone. Then it became Today an iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch. And then it became Today an iOS. I just changed. I literally bought domains in the middle of an Apple keynote. Well, Steve Jobs was on stage and saying, and now we're going to call it iOS. And I went, go to Hover and bought todayanios.com right during the middle of the keynote. So changing your title, I think, is one thing you can do to help optimize because there's not much there for search. So that's the first thing I'd say. Look at the title. Now, if we go into Spotify, Spotify does look at description. What's in the description? Apple absolutely does not. So if you have some words in your description of your show, that can help you in the Spotify search. But I wouldn't keyword stuff it. It doesn't do you any good in Apple. And I'm not sure how much it does for you in Spotify. I just know that on certain keywords, I did find that when I buried them in the description, like unique phrases, they did come up in search results. And then third is YouTube, and YouTube is more of algorithmic based. So you have to get lucky on the algorithm on that side of it. The reason I'm going to say this, the reason I start with Apple and Spotify and then YouTube last, for most podcasters, forget the top 200 podcasters, right? The Joe Rogans, the Theo Vons, the Call Her Daddies. For most podcasters, their audience is Apple number 1, Spotify number 2, a distant third is YouTube. Most podcasters are lucky to get 4 to 5% of their audience consumption over on YouTube. That's not saying that overall podcasting might not get more consumption in YouTube. What I'm saying is when you take the top shows out, the top 1%, for the 99% of podcasters, people starting, there's actually more consumption of podcasts in Apple Podcasts and then Spotify than there is in YouTube.
Interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
Rob, do you think the biggest growth problem in podcasting is discovery, content quality? Is it positioning? You mentioned consistency, or is it something else? What do you think the biggest growth problem is?
I don't believe there's a discovery problem in podcasting. I believe there's my podcast hasn't been discovered problem, but that's not a discovery problem. People that listen to podcasts don't complain that they can't find podcasts. They can't find podcasts on their topic. What they're happening is they're not finding your podcast on your topic. And that's when podcasters go, there's a discoverability problem. No, that's a me problem. That's not a we problem. And the me problem, again, comes down to the title's wrong and they don't have a clear title on their show. And then it comes down to Apple. It's based on the title of your show, what's in the author tag, and then sorted by the total number of subscribers all time. So you have to make sure that people are subscribing to your podcast. They're hitting or following your podcast now. They're hitting the follow button in Apple Podcast. So you have to make sure your call to action is that. So many times people have the wrong call to actions. It's like rate and review my show. It's much better to say, hey, make sure you follow my show. If you followed it, then you can rate and review. But if you haven't followed, don't rate and review, follow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the average podcaster fades pretty quickly these days. I've heard things anywhere from 8 to like 20 something episodes. From your experience working with thousands of creators. What separates the people who make it past that wall from the ones who quit?
Okay. So when I looked at this, I did find a couple of clusters, and the late Todd Cochran found the same data. He looked at it at Blueberry, and we compared notes. And what we found was there was the group of pod faders that typically pod faded out before episode 5. And this group was, wow, this is harder than I thought. This is hard. I'm a blogger, and blogging is so much easier, and I got to do this extra work, and I got to do this editing, and I got to do all this extra stuff. That group, or I can't find any guests. I'm having a hard time getting guests on my show, right? That group early on underestimated the extra work it takes to do a podcast. The next group is around episode 50. And when you looked at the groups around episode 50, it was people that said, I'm going to commit to this for a year, and they're doing 1 episode a week. And they got to that 1 year mark, and they looked at their numbers, and they weren't happy, and they got out. And a lot of the times, people are getting out and looking at their numbers, and they don't understand they actually were successful. I've had people come to me and say, oh, I have 600, 800 downloads an episode, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong with my show. And like one guy, his show was about pneumatic valves. I'm like, what was your expectation for your audience size? I'm an engineer, and just reading the description of your podcast is putting me to sleep. But the fact that you got 600 people showing up every week to listen to your podcast. So I had to put it to him in this example. I said, do you ever go and talk at a conference? He said, yes. I'm like, how many people were in the room? He's like, maybe about 200. And I go, yeah, probably half of them were checking their email. So I go, you spent how much money in your company to get you to that conference to speak? And I go, and you have a weekly show that's got 6 times that probably active audience that you had there? I go, you're successful. You are not unsuccessful. So getting your expectations right. I think a lot of people pod fade because they just thought, oh, they were going to get millions of downloads. Nobody gets millions of downloads. I had a major golf manufacturer one time, and they were complaining that they were only getting 45,000 downloads per episode. And I had to explain to them, dude, you're in the top 1%. And they're like, what? They're like, what do you mean we're in the top 1%? I go, yeah. They're like, well, we have 5 million followers on Facebook. I go, Facebook followers do not equal podcast listeners. I go, you had one of the Paul brothers, I won't say which one, 60 million. He had 60 million YouTube subscribers and social media followers, and he was right at 40,000 downloads an episode. I go, followers in social media do not translate to listeners in podcasting. Or now the new IAB the new IAB version spec is going to say podcast consumers. We've changed it from listeners to podcast consumers.
Rob, I wanted to go in the direction where you're going because I'm the money guy on the show. One of the things I think a lot of people fade is because of monetization gap. And I think that because they buy into this approach, there's so many of these coach hustlers out there telling people they're going to make $1 million by podcasting. Where do you think that podcasters get misled in that? And do you think that's triggering some of this pod fade as well? Because I hear you saying they're not happy with the downloads, but that's that race to the bottom I talk about all the time of CPM. If you want to make 3 cents a month, get a big audience, but it's not really where the money is it, Rob?
Most people that make a lot of money in podcasting make it from promoting a product or service or themselves as an expert on some topic. If you're using the podcast, Trader Joe's uses the podcast to promote their product and service. They never take ads on their podcast. eBay used to have a really great podcast, and it was for interacting with the audience. It was never about monetization, but they had good size audience. And people that use the podcast to help promote their webinars, promote their book, comedians, right? Why did a lot of comedians get into podcasting? They got into it because they were able to get not only download numbers and interact with their audience on a regular basis, but they could then take the stats and say, look, to the guy at the comedy store in St. Louis, I get 250 downloads from the St. Louis DMA. You should book me. And so, people have used the podcast not from the generating revenue from CPMs, but from generating revenue from their own product or service. Now, that's not to say there are podcasts that are making some good money. I mean, obviously you got people like Joe Rogan and others that are making huge money and huge bank, and Tim Ferriss and others. So there is definitely a place to make money on the CPM side, and there's more opportunities coming up on that. But you have to ask yourself, why are you getting into it? And if you don't have a product or service to market, then you are getting in and you want to monetize, then you do have to look at what are my options on what I call direct monetization of your podcast. And that comes down to advertising and premium offerings.
So do you think, speaking of that advertising, do you think that smaller shows are focusing too much on sponsorships or maybe not enough?
If your primary goal is to monetize, you need to look at your format of your show. You need to understand that you have to want to have advertisers. There's so many people I've worked with over the years that want advertising dollars, but don't want advertisers. And you can't, the two kind of go hand in hand. So I've heard people get out there and they go to read the ad read and it's reading it in a mono voice, right? And you can literally hear the paper crinkling as they're reading the ad. And that's not good for the advertiser. It's not good for you as the podcaster. So if you do want to monetize, go in full force. Now you also need to understand you have to be at a certain level to have host read ads. If you want to go out to some of the bigger agencies, some of them agencies now say 50,000 downloads and some are 20,000 as a minimum per episode. Captivate, we're launching a marketplace that will allow you, any podcaster at any size, to interact with advertisers and bring in some host read, and then also have programmatic ads. And that's the other thing. If you're going to do advertising, you have to do both. You have to have both host read and CPM model. Now,
Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah.
What is the marketplace that you're talking about?
So the Captivate's launching. We announced this last month that we're launching a marketplace at Captivate where allow podcasters to present their podcast out, and then advertisers come in and find their podcast. And by advertisers, we mean it could be other podcasters. I think a lot of the people are going to be buying ads. If you want to look at promoting your show, honestly, the only way I've seen that really, there's two things I say where if you spent your money on work to help promote your podcast, it's spending your money running ads on other podcasts, or doing a banner ad on Overcast or Castbox, because those are podcast specific apps. So having your promo run on another podcast in your genre or similar demos, is a great way to get word out if you come into this space and you don't know anyone. You haven't started cross-promoting. You haven't built up a tribe of other podcasters. So this marketplace will allow some podcasters to be up there and be discovered by other podcasters and advertisers. So that's one thing. And then part of that marketplace will also be programmatic ads. So you could turn on immediately to start getting advertising for programmatic ads for your show.
Let's talk about that for a second, because you with Captivate and Dax US, there's been a lot of conversation around making monetization more accessible for creators. So for an independent podcaster who's never touched programmatic advertising before, what does that actually mean in plain English?
So programmatic ads are pre-produced ads that you would typically hear on radio. And you are going to accept certain categories or block certain IEB categories, but you're not getting a chance to accept a specific advertiser. So you may say yes to the automotive category, but you don't have an option to say, I want Tesla and Rivian, but I don't want any gas cars, right? Or vice versa. I want Toyota and I want Ford, but I don't want Tesla or Rivian. You don't have that option. When you pick a category, you're going to get the ads. Like I had one person that freaked out because they had said yes to the food category and got a McDonald's ad. And I'm like, okay, you said yes to food. The number one advertiser in food in the world is, McDonald's. So shocker that McDonald's ad showed up on your show. So you have to have a little bit more tolerance. But I was talking with Mike Rowe, and he was kind of, I don't know if I want to have these ads. And I said, well, I watched Dirty Jobs on Discovery Channel, and I saw a Hyundai commercial. Did you endorse that? He's like, no. I go, same thing on the podcast. People are going to understand that you're not endorsing it when it's a pre-produced ad. So that he was like, oh, that clicked in his head, and then he said, yeah, okay, I'll do programmatic. So you have to be a little bit more accepting of the fact that there are going to be some ads in there from maybe a product or service that you're not exactly excited with. Now you can block categories, and Captivate will allow you to block down to individual categories, so you can get rid of the gambling, you can get rid of the lottery, you can get rid of, there are so many weird categories in there. There's a Wiccan category in there.
Okay.
Yes, there's ones for psychics. You can block the
Mm-hmm.
psychics category. So yes, you'll have that option to get down and granular and say, I don't want psychics or Wiccans on my podcast. Or maybe you do.
Maybe you
you
do.
want to block all the other religious ones, but leave the Wiccan one. So you have that option.
Yeah, and Ralph, before you jump in, I want to just pause here real quick. Rob, we were noticing throughout so far the interview that your mic is clipping a little bit. So I just wanted to call it out in case you knew something to do to fix that or not, but if you can't, no big deal. But I just thought I'd call it out.
I'm blaming it on the Blue Yeti.
No, don't. He said it's just fine.
I'll move back a little bit. There we go. And I'll actually bring up the sound and all right, input. And
What software are you using to do that?
I'm just bringing the input on the main Mac. So how about now?
Now it actually it sounds like it went too low. Now it's very low.
Now too low, right about
Now-
there.
That's good.
All
That's
right.
good.
Sorry
Yes.
about that.
No worries. No worries at all. Ralph, go ahead.
Rob, we're working with independent and do-it-yourself podcasters, so that kind of lesson is super valuable. Now, Rob, there's two other topics I want to talk about today, and I'm going to let you pick where we go here because I know you have feelings on both of these. I'm a Captivate customer, and a couple months ago when you started the HLS, you and Elsie did the webinar, and I have to be honest with you. Man, I felt like you were dragging a stone uphill with this HLS video. Now, maybe that wasn't your intention, but I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about AI. Do you want to talk about HLS video first, or video and podcasting, or what do you prefer?
Absolutely. So, yeah, we'll talk about HLS. And I'd heard from a couple people like, well, I'm like, it's new-ish on the video side. And what I wanted to tell people was, just because Apple now has this new way to have video and podcasting doesn't mean you need to do this. Too many people are like, everybody needs to do video. And I'm like, if you're not comfortable doing video, don't do video. I mean, if you don't feel good about it, it's not your cup of tea, there's no reason to. There's still more time in the day to consume audio than any other form of media. And if you are someone that's struggling to get your show out as it is now, and you're almost at that point where you start feeling like it's time to make the donuts, adding video to your workload is not going to be conducive to a long-term relationship with you and your audience. You are going to pod fade. So my thing was, I didn't want to see people jump into audio, to video, when they're really happy doing audio and they don't want to do video, but they're jumping in because it's the thing, the next big shiny thing, just like Second Life was, or live streaming audio was way back when. And just stick with what your audience likes. I mean, there are certain audiences that just want audio, and they're driving in the car, they're not going to watch video. And on top of that, Apple's supported video for 20 years. And when people had the option to put both audio and video up for a podcast, 2 different RSS feeds into Apple Podcasts over the years, 20-1, the audience chose audio. So it wasn't like Apple's audience has been clamoring for video. When they had the option, they didn't choose it. The reality is YouTube won video. And if you want to put video and do video, fine, put it up and do it. Do the HLS. Go to Spotify and have it there, and have it in YouTube. But if you're just an audio person, stick with audio. And that was what I was trying to get. So many people were like, oh, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it. And I've always been one that said, you do what you feel comfortable doing. Not because this guru or that guru said video is the next big thing. They've been saying video is the next big thing for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now that Apple has this HLS in there, you don't even know, honestly, if it is the next big thing, because the way Apple does it is you get file, you upload a video file, they demux it, they got an audio version and then the video without the audio. The audio part of it gets automatically downloaded. And then when someone goes in on the iPhone and hits play, it automatically, if it's in there, will start pulling video over. Maybe they don't want the video, right? So let's see at the end of the day if the consumers really did choose. Were there podcasts that went into video and their audience grew? Did this happen? Did it cause anybody's audiences to grow? Did it cause your audience to shrink? But if you're on the fence, wait, get some data. That's what I was trying to point to.
Sid, sorry, not Sid. I was reading something that somebody asked Sid. Ralph, you added video recently. You did the Apple video thing recently, and it may be way too soon to ask, but are you noticing anything different as far as your numbers go?
I am, yes, and I'm a Captivate customer, Rob, and I was one of the early, believers. We still have one show we can't get it to work with. I've been working with Danny. We've been beating our heads for about 6 weeks on this, but yeah, I've seen a little bit of an uptake actually, Mark, and part of that is because I've been doing video all along and releasing it on YouTube. So for me, and I've got a team that helps me on the production side. So for me, it wasn't any added work because I was already doing video. Rob, one of the follow-ups I have for that is this whole HLS technology is changing the way things are done as well. And you mentioned that you're one of those tech guys. How do you feel about that? Because this is changing things as well. These APIs going into, Sam Sethi and I had a conversation about this last week on Facebook Messenger. What do you think about that? Because that's part of this that's going on too.
Yes, and then we're also going to make the alternative tag available so that the video will be available there. The issue is, Apple chose to go with the API route. I'm a RSS purist, so I would have liked to have just seen it as an alternative tag and gone that way. I think Sam will probably say the same thing. I think he's would have one. Hey, why do we have to have it with an API call? So I would have liked to have seen it that way, because then all the other apps out there could have adopted it and then had that option to pull in the video if they weren't currently supporting video. So not the way I understand why Apple's doing it, and it's again, Apple makes decisions based on what's best for the consumer, not what's best for the podcaster. And they're always going to make their decisions on what's best for the consumer. So they had their reasons, and I understand them. But as on the podcaster side of things, I would prefer to have seen it not be via API.
I think Sid has a question. Sid, over on Clubhouse. Sid, did you want to ask?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So I accidentally was watching a show that had video. I didn't realize it had video until I looked down at my phone. And when I was watching and listening to it, there was a very noticeable lag between the audio and the video. And it felt like because on YouTube, when you're watching, you feel like you're watching a video that has audio in it. And there's like the video's talking to you, right? This to me felt like it was an audio that I was listening to that they just popped up a video. And then I watched another one. And so the first lag was probably 3 seconds. The second lag time I watched it was about 1 second. Then I watched the same show the other day and I did not notice the lag. Is this something that's happening within Apple? Is it any idea what the cause of this is? But it certainly did not create the best user experience from watching and listening at the same time.
So from a technical point of view, what's happening is there's literally are two different files. And Apple is demuxing. So basically, you have the video file and you demux it, and now you have an audio file. So you have a video with no audio, and then you have the audio file, and then the video is supposed to sync to the audio. The audio file is still being downloaded automatically. If you are a consumer of podcasts and have it set up to automatically download, the audio gets automatically downloaded. Then when someone hits play, then the video is supposed to sync up, and they're supposed to be in sync. But when you have two files and something's supposed to be in sync, doesn't mean 100% will be in sync. I had not heard reports of that, but I am not surprised of that, given that it is two different files. and maybe that was something with an issue, and you said you haven't. Yeah, I would be interesting to find out which podcast it was, and take a look at it. But yeah,
It was. I'm happy to tell you, it was one of your competitors. It was Buzzcast because I'm a
mm,
Buzzsprout user,
okay,
so I listened to their podcast, but it makes sense now because I'm still learning about all this. I did not realize that it was two separate files syncing up with each other, where
yeah,
YouTube is just one file that you upload.
right.
So it makes sense why it's happening. But I watched one from this week and it did not happen. So the sync obviously has gotten better.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an issue with the hosting platforms because it's supposed to be where the two files are synced up by with Apple Podcasts. So I think if there's an issue on the sync, I think it would be more of the client playback issue than the hosting. So I don't think Buzzsprout did anything wrong. I just think it might have been a glitch in the playback on the client side.
Rob, I wanted to ask you a question. Dave Campbell in our audience asked us to ask you about the discrepancy between Apple listen numbers and hosting site analytics. So are you aware of what he's talking about there? And can you help us out with that?
Well, if you look at the play number in Apple Podcasts, here's what a play is. If you do this, play, pause, play, pause, play, pause, that fast in any podcast hosting company, that would be 0 because you haven't gotten a minute's worth of content. In Apple, that is 3. So
3 seconds.
3 plays.
3
That will
plays.
show up as
Got it.
3 plays in your stats in Apple Podcasts. Right? In any hosting company, a minute's worth of content has not been delivered. So, anybody that's filtering for the IAB, it's at least 1 minute of content's been delivered. Filtered over a 24-hour window for unique IP address and user agent combo. In any podcast hosting company, even if you did play and you waited for a minute, hit pause and then play and then pause and then play and then pause, it'd still be 1. The best case, it would be 1. Right? That would be it. But in Apple, play, pause, play, pause, play, pause, 3. Right. So that's the issue with the Apple analytics are always going to show the plays higher than that. So you can't. I always tell people, don't look at Apple stats for magnitude. Look at Apple stats for trends. Where are people consuming your episodes? I mean, Apple stats, the consumption information, some of the most valuable information podcasters never look at. If you go to Apple Podcasts and you look at where in your episodes you should be looking for 2 things. Where in your episodes people are not leaving, right? They go 15 minutes without leaving. There's no drop off in percentage of listeners. What did you say in those 15 minutes that captivated all of your audience? Because whatever it was, you want to capture that lightning in a bottle and repeat. And then where do you see the drop offs? Where are people dropping off? Where is the percentage going from 50% to 40% in 2 minutes? What happened in that 2 minutes? What did you talk about that drove 10% or 20% in that case of the listening audience away from your show? Right? What was it that caused that? And oh, by the way, you're always going to have this big drop off in the first few minutes of your podcast. So ultimately, when you look at most of these consumption stats, you want to look basically starting about 5 minutes in to 5 minutes left and look at that group in there. How much of a drop off do you have from the 5 minute in to 5 minutes left if you have an hour long podcast? How much is that dropping overall? Because that's your real audience about 5 minutes in on the consumption side. So
Rob, I have a follow-up for you because while you're talking about this AMP, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about these new AMP statistics, these new AMP agreements. Do you think that's something that the industry should embrace? And do you think that's something Apple would embrace? Because that would solve that play problem you're talking about.
Okay, so AMP is supposed to be about consumption. That was what they were supposed to be talking about. Now they also talked about, downloads of 30 seconds or their play number of 30 seconds versus that. They should have honestly put it at 1 minute, just like the IEB. I don't understand why in the world they're trying to change that number from a minute to 30 seconds. If they're saying, hey, the whole reason we're coming in here is to be more friendly to advertisers. Their service, their idea is, hey, we're going to be friendly to advertisers. Well, dropping it from a minute to 30 seconds is not friendly to advertisers. That inflates the numbers. So they should have gone to a minute. I think that's a mistake that the AMP group made, looking at it. Now, is there much of a difference between 30 seconds and 60? No, but and some people have looked at that already, and James had some numbers on that. But the point is, there was a difference. That wasn't big, but there was a difference. And why would you drop it from a minute, which has been the IAB standard all along? Now, some people are saying, hey, what's the video standard, right? YouTube. I was in the IAB committee and we first started talking, we found out that the video views on YouTube was 3 seconds. So when we started working on the IAB specs way back when, we had someone say, hey, yeah, YouTube was using 3 seconds to count it as a view. Now they're saying, oh, well, now it's 30 seconds. Well, it used to be 30. And we went to a minute. We went back and forth on the IB about we picked that minute number, and there was a lot of debate along a lot of companies, and versus AMP, which is a very small number of companies, and so I just think they could have done it a little bit different. I think at the end of the day, the IAB is going to hold a lot more weight than AMP will. IAB is a bigger organization, and they need to work with IAB. IAB does not need to work with AMP. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rob. And by the way, In and Around Podcasting, that is Rob and Elsie's podcast, and you can check it out at inaroundpodcasting.com. We'll have several links to connect with Rob in the show notes. Sid, I know you had a question, and then I want to wrap up with a question about AI for Rob. So go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. My issue with Apple Analytics is quite the opposite of what you just described, Rob. So I go into Buzzsprout and I see that an episode had 100 downloads on Apple, and I go into Apple and to look at it, and I see that that episode only had 60 downloads. I'm just using examples. So my experience is just the opposite. Buzzsprout says I have more plays on Apple than Apple's actually saying that I have. Can you identify what that issue is?
Well, okay? So I'll break this down to client side and server side. Client side stats are server side stats. That's your hosting company. They're going to tell you if the episode was delivered or to somebody, right? So download does not mean a play or a consumption. So on your any podcast hosting company, we have no idea what the consumption was. We just know that this file was delivered to said user. And again, it's based on user agent, IP address, at least a minute worth of data content was delivered to that user. Apple, on the other hand, client side, is going to look at consumption, someone hitting the play button. So if episodes are being delivered, but they're never being played, they're going to be lower, or they're going to have a lower number over there on Apple. So it just depends on if your show has subscribers that just aren't playing the episodes. Now, what's supposed to happen is after 5 episodes and 15 days, if there's no plays, that Apple pauses the downloads. So overall, over time, it should work out. If you have a lot of new subscribers coming in and they're playing once or twice and then they're moving on, and I would look at your consumption data, look at how far into your episodes, what percentage of those people that hit play, how many of them are consuming to the 95% mark of your episode. See what that number is. See how much it drops from the 5 minutes in versus, or 5% in versus 95% in.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And as I said, final question. I want to get your stance on AI in podcasting right now, because I think there are a couple of different camps out there, and I'm curious where you land.
All right. So I put AI into 3 buckets. There's AI tools which help podcasters. These are tools that help you get to bed earlier because they're going to do some things for you, do some cleanup, going to take out the ums, the uhs, the ahs. They're going to take out the background noise. They're going to clean up the clipping. So that is one of the one bucket for AI. And I love those tools that Adobe, Auphonic, there's Descript, a bunch of those AI tools that are out there to help you as a podcaster take your human generated content, your HGC, and clean it, polish it, buff it, and get it out there. There's some tools that are coming out where once you publish a new episode, they will automatically sync to your RSS feed and pull out everything, create clips for you and publish to social media for you and things like that. Love that stuff. That is what AI is supposed to be there. It's supposed to be a tool, right? Then there is AI tools that people are just using to generate the content from the ground up, right? Completely create the content, create the voice. This is AI slop. This is what I don't consider a podcast. This is stuff that's coming from a bunch of different companies. Some of these companies deliberately are pumping out thousands of shows, not episodes, shows a month, and then tens of thousands of episodes, and they're just throwing it out, hoping that and picking titles that will trick people into trying to consume the content, thinking it's something to do with Kelsey Brothers or Taylor Swift or whatever it is. They're sometimes even picking artwork and titles that are similar to other shows that are out there. Those to me are the shoplifters of the podcast world. They are coming in and they are grabbing downloads from advertisers that are causing the ROIs to go down because they're not real audiences, and they're making money, but they're hurting every podcaster. Those people I don't like. Right? That's the AI slop. And then there's the between, like, is it AI or not? Like, someone might write up a script with on their own, but then use script voice to create the podcast. There are some legitimate reasons for that and that are good. Like, sometimes someone loses their voice. I've had a podcaster I knew who lost his voice for a week, but he did a daily podcast and he had advertisers. And he said at the beginning, hey, this is AI Brian. And he let people know that he was using AI to generate his voice. And I think if you are using AI tools to generate your voice, you should indicate that. Good audience will know. Those emotions the AI never pings your emotions exactly right. It might get the sound of your voice, but it doesn't get the depth of your being, so to speak, without getting metaphysical. And then conversely, there are some people that use the AI tools to generate the script, and then they just read it, human read. Is that AI slop or not? I tell you what, the content's not going to be all that good. You're probably not going to get a good audience. But you can use those AI tools. Again, I go back to that first group. If you're using the AI tools to give you some ideas on what to do for a show and to do some work, like background work, if you're going to interview somebody, it's easier to say to the AI, hey, pull me up 5 questions on this person and look at their background. Give me 5 or 10 questions to ask this person. David Letterman sat there with the blue cards, right? Yeah. His staff put those questions on the cards. He didn't do the research. His staff did that. So if you're using AI to create those blue cards for you, you're still the personality that's reading those questions, asking them. And it's not the first question, it's the follow-up question that matters. And the AI ain't going to be there to help you on the follow-up.
Exactly.
So that's how I split AI. I think it's great for tools to help podcasters. I think it is horrible for the AI slop where it's 100% generated and they're just burn and churn. Now, there are some places where you could use AI slop that are legitimate. And that's where you're creating a weather podcast for Sydney, Ohio. Really, who's going to create Sydney, Ohio or Hayes, Kansas podcasts? So for that perspective, you may get customized weather podcasts that show up in the morning that you can listen to for your small little niche area that no human would ever take the time to cover that market. So that there's some advantages there. But when it's a quote unquote podcast covering a tech topic or covering a political topic, and it's just all pure AI created slop, ultimately it's just hurting the industry, in my opinion.
I agree. Rob, This was exactly the kind of clarity that I think indie podcasters need right now. You know, things like growth and monetization, AI and video, it can all really feel overwhelming. But the real question is, what actually helps you create a better show? What helps you serve your audience and build something sustainable? And you really hit on a lot of this today in a little over an hour. So thank you so much for joining us, for your insights, for your time today. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And we are back tomorrow, 8 a.m. Eastern time. We are covering all the news around the world of podcasting. So come join us, hear our thoughts and opinions on some of these stories, and let's talk about them. So until then, make it a great day, everybody. Take care. Stop.